At the edge of a quiet bay, where the water turns silver in the evening and gold in the morning, there is a small harbor town. No one remembers exactly when it was founded, only that it has always seemed to exist in a kind of gentle, unhurried time, where the days slide into each other like waves folding over the same stretch of sand. Tied to the town's old wooden dock is a ship. Her name is the Wanderer. She is old, older than the harbor master, older than the lighthouse. Some say she is older than the town itself, though no one is quite sure, because no one was there to count the years as they slipped by. The Wanderer was built by a shipwright named Elion, a patient man with slow hands and slower thoughts, who believed that anything worth building was worth building carefully. He chose planks of oak, cut from trees that had stood for 200 years before they ever became part of a hull. He shaped her ribs, he fitted her deck, he raised her mast, tall and straight, like a single arm reaching toward the clouds. It took him the better part of 3 years to finish her. Some winters, the frost was so heavy that his tools stuck to his hands if he wasn't careful, and he would simply set them down, build a small fire in the corner of his workshop, and wait for the world to warm again before continuing. He never rushed a single joint. He used to tell his apprentices that a ship built in a hurry remembers that hurry forever, in every creak and every leak, and that a ship built slowly, with care, remembers that too, in the way she holds steady through a storm. When she was finished, he stood back and said, quietly, "There. That is the Wanderer." And so she was. For many years, the Wanderer sailed. She carried fishermen out before dawn, when the sky was the color of a bruise healing, soft purples fading into gray. She carried traders to distant ports, their hulls heavy with salt and cloth and small clay jars of oil. She carried lovers who wanted nothing more than to sit on her deck and watch the horizon disappear into night, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of the sea. She weathered storms too, plenty of them. There was the storm the old fishermen still call the long night, when the sky turned the color of a healing bruise gone wrong, deep green-black, and the Wanderer was the only boat that made it back to harbor before the worst of it hit. Elion, by then an old man himself, stood on the dock in the rain and simply watched her come in, safe, and did not say a word, though everyone who saw his face that night said he looked, for a moment, like a father watching a child come home. There were quieter nights too, far more of them than stormy ones, when the Wanderer simply sat at anchor under a wide, calm sky, her sails furled and resting, her deck creaking now and then as the tide shifted beneath her. On those nights, the harbor was almost silent, except for the soft clinking of rigging against the mast, a small, steady sound, like a clock that had long since stopped caring what time it was. But the sea is not gentle, not even when it seems calm. Salt creeps into wood, sun bleaches and cracks it. Waves, over years and years, wear down even the strongest oak, the way time wears down everything, slowly, patiently, without any hurry at all. One spring morning, a harbor worker named Mira noticed that one of the Wanderer's deck planks had begun to splinter. It was a small thing, a little crack running along the grain of the wood like a river drawn on a map. So she replaced it. She found a plank of oak, similar to the old one, and with careful, unhurried hands, she pried up the broken piece and laid the new one in its place. It fit almost perfectly, almost. When she stepped back to look at her work, the ship looked the same. Of course it looked the same, one plank, out of hundreds. Who would even notice? No one did, and the Wanderer sailed on, just as she always had, carrying fishermen and traders and quiet lovers who liked to watch the horizon fold into darkness. Years passed, as years do, softly, and then suddenly, and then softly again. More planks needed replacing, then a section of railing, worn smooth in, then worn through by 1,000 resting elbows and 1,000 slow afternoons. Then part of the deck. Then, one autumn, a whole side of the hull, damaged in a storm no one much liked to talk about, though everyone remembered the sound of it, the wind like a low moan, the waves slapping the dock like something restless and unable to sleep. Mira grew old doing this work. Her own children learned it from her, how to choose a plank that would bend the right way with the tide, how to season new wood so it wouldn't warp, how to work quietly and patiently, the way her mother had taught her, and her mother's mother before that. It became, in its own way, a kind of family, generations of hands, all devoted to keeping one old ship afloat. But the Wanderer did not stop being the Wanderer, even as her damaged wood found its way, slowly, to the woodpile behind the shipwright's shop, where it dried and cracked and eventually became firewood, keeping some family warm on a cold night, its long life ending in a small orange glow and a little curl of smoke drifting up into a dark, star-scattered sky. Here's where the story turns a little strange, not frightening, just curious, like a shape you almost recognize in the dark. Because if you added up all the years, all the seasons, all the plank by plank, board by board replacements, mast, rail, deck, hull, rope, sail, again and again, over decades, you would find something curious indeed. Every single piece of wood that Elion the shipwright had first used to build the Wanderer had, eventually, been replaced. Not all at once, never all at once, just one plank here, one beam there, so slowly that no one sailing on her ever noticed the difference from one day to the next. But if you had a very old memory, the memory of the harbor itself, perhaps, or of the moon, who has watched this same dock for thousands and thousands of years, you would know that the wood beneath the sailor's feet was entirely new. Every last splinter of it. There is, in fact, a second half to this story, one that most people in the harbor town had forgotten, or never knew at all. For years, Mira had kept every plank she removed from the Wanderer, rather than burning them. She wasn't sure why, at first, only that it felt wrong to let them simply disappear. She stacked them carefully in the back corner of an old boat shed, out of the weather, plank resting on plank, in the same order she had taken them from the ship. Decades later, her grandson, a quiet boy named Petter who liked puzzles more than most children liked games, found the stack of old wood and, out of curiosity, and with more patience than anyone expected from someone so young, began to piece it together. Beam by beam, plank by plank, following the faint marks his grandmother had scratched into each one, he built a second ship, smaller now, and grayer, and creaking in places the Wanderer never had, but unmistakably built from the very same wood that Elion had first shaped, all those years ago. When it was finished, the town did not quite know what to think. There, floating in the harbor, side by side, were two ships. One was the Wanderer, the one that had sailed every year without pause, carrying fishermen and lovers and traders, known and loved by everyone, though not one splinter of her original wood remained. The other was smaller, quieter, unfamiliar to most of the town, yet made entirely of the Wanderer's first, original timber, the very oak Elion had chosen with his own hands. Which one, people began to ask each other over their evening meals, was the true Wanderer? On a warm evening not long after, an old sailor named Theodore sat on the dock with his granddaughter, a small girl named Anna, who liked to ask questions the way some children like to collect shells, carefully, one at a time, turning each one over to see what was underneath. "Grandfather," Anna said, watching the two ships rock gently side by side, "which one is the real Wanderer?" Theodore smiled, the way old sailors smile when they are asked something that sounds simple but isn't. "That," he said slowly, "is a very good question. Two good questions, really, tucked inside one. Every plank of wood I touched when I was your age," he told her, "has long since left that first ship. The mast I once climbed is gone from her. The rail I once held onto in a storm is gone from her. And yet, there it is, floating over there, in Pettar's quiet little boat. Old wood, gathered up again, shaped back into something that looks almost like where it began." Anna thought about this for a while, swinging her feet above the water. The evening was soft and orange, and somewhere a gull called once, then settled into silence. A little way down the dock, Petter himself was coiling a length of rope in slow, unhurried loops, humming something soft and tuneless under his breath, entirely unbothered by the question his grandmother's old wood had stirred up in the rest of the town. To him, it had simply been a puzzle worth finishing, nothing more, the way some people finish a jigsaw not because they need the picture, but because it feels good to watch the pieces find each other. So is Pettar's boat the real one, then? Since it's made of the real wood? It's a question wiser people than Theodore have turned over in their minds for more than 2,000 years, ever since a thinker named Plutarch first wrote about a ship much like this one. A ship kept afloat by sailors replacing its rotting planks, one by one, until people began to wonder whether it was the same ship at all. Centuries later, other thinkers imagined this very puzzle, two ships, one old and one new, each with its own claim to being the true, original. "I think," he said, "that the Wanderer, the one we all know, the one that sailed every season of my whole life, is not really her wood at all. Wood comes and wood goes, the way skin cells come and go on your own small hands, Anna. Did you know that? Almost none of the you sitting here beside me is made of the same matter as the you who was born. Your body has replaced itself, piece by piece, many times over, the way the Wanderer has replaced her planks. But you are still you," he said. "So maybe a ship is still a ship, not because of the wood, but because of the shape the wood is holding, and the story that shape has lived through. The pattern, the way she was built and rebuilt, and cared for, and loved, again and again, by hands that wanted her to keep sailing. In Petar's boat? Anna asked, quieter now, her eyelids growing heavy. Petar's boat is a different kind of true, Theodore said. It's the truth of the wood, of where it came from, of the tree it once was, of the hands that first shaped it. Both boats are honest. They're just honest about different things. One about a story that never stopped. The other about a beginning that never quite left. He paused, and pulled his coat a little tighter around her shoulders. Some questions don't have a winner, little one. They just have two true answers that don't agree with each other, floating quietly side by side in the same harbor. And that's all right. Not every question needs to be solved to be worth asking. Some questions are like the sea itself. You don't solve the sea. You simply sit beside it, and let it move, slow and steady, exactly as it wants to. The Wanderer creaked softly against the dock, the way old ships do, a low wooden sound like a sigh, like something settling in for the night. A little further along, Petar's smaller boat creaked too, in an older, quieter voice, as if it were answering. The tide came in, unhurried, the way it always does, filling the harbor inch by inch, without a single wasted motion. Somewhere down the coast, a lighthouse blinked on, then off, then on again, its slow rhythm as steady and unbothered as a sleeping heartbeat, marking time for no one in particular, simply because that was its quiet purpose, night after night after night. A little further out, past the breakwater, the open sea rolled on in the dark, indifferent and enormous, the way it always had been, long before Elion ever chose his first plank of oak, and long after the last splinter of either ship would ever return to it. There is something comforting, Theodore sometimes thought, in a thing so much larger than any single question a person could ask it. The sea did not need to know which ship was real. It simply carried them both, the same as it carried everything else that was ever set upon it, gently, and without keeping score. Somewhere above, the stars kept doing what they've always done, burning quietly, so far away that their light takes years and years just to reach the earth, arriving long after the moment it first began its journey. In a way, every star is a little like the Wanderer. What you see has already changed, already moved on, already become something slightly different than the light suggests. And still, it's beautiful. Still, it's real. Still, it's there. Anna fell asleep first, right there against her grandfather's shoulder, lulled by the creak of old rope and the soft slap of water against two old hulls. Theodore sat a while longer, in no hurry at all, watching the lanterns along the dock flicker one by one, listening to the harbor settle into its slow nighttime breathing. Eventually, he rose, careful not to wake her, and carried her home along the quiet street, past dark windows and sleeping cats curled on doorsteps. Behind them, the two ships rocked alone in the dark, patient as ever, waiting for no particular thing, simply existing, simply being themselves, whatever, exactly, that self was made of. The town, in time, stopped asking which ship was the true one. It simply began to call the older, sailing ship the Wanderer, as it always had, and the smaller, quieter one Petar's boat, as though giving up on the question had been its own kind of answer. Both ships stayed tied up at that same dock for many more years, weathering the same storms, drifting a little closer together each winter and a little further apart each spring, the way old, familiar things do, never quite touching, never quite parting either. Children who grew up in that town came to think of the two boats simply as a pair, the way some people think of siblings. Related, but not identical, each one telling a slightly different version of the very same story. And that is, perhaps, the last thought worth carrying out of this story. Everything changes, always, cell by cell, thought by thought, year by year. And still, somehow, unmistakably, wonderfully, it remains itself. And sometimes, quietly, in SO everything changes, always, cell by cell, thought by thought, year by year. And still, somehow, unmistak everything changes, always, cell by cell, thought by T everything changes, always, cell by cell, thought by thought, year by year. And still, somehow, unmistakably, wonderfully, it remains itself. And sometimes, quietly, in some back corner of a life, the old pieces gather themselves up to, and become something new, and just as true, in their own separate way. The old plank is lifted gently from its place, carried off to become something else entirely, firewood, or driftwood, or a second small boat with a story all its own, while a new, softer piece settles quietly into its spot instead, ready for tomorrow. The harbor stays still. The two ships rest against the dock, side by side. The tide holds them both gently, the way night now holds the little town, and the sailor, and the sleeping girl in his arms, and everyone else who has, tonight, let the day drift quietly out to sea. Somewhere in that quiet stillness, a rope creaks softly and settles. A lantern gutters low, then holds its small, steady flame. And the whole harbor breathes out slowly, the way anything does when it has finally stopped asking questions it was never quite going to answer tonight, and has simply decided, instead, to rest hot, year by year. And still, somehow, unmistakably, wonderfully, it remains itself. And sometimes, quietly, in some back corner of a life, the old pieces gather themselves up to, and become something new, and just as true, in their own separate way. The old plank is lifted gently from its place, carried off to become something else entirely, firewood, or driftwood, or a second small boat with a story all its own, while a new, softer piece settles quietly into its spot instead, ready for tomorrow. The harbor stays still, the two ships rest against the dock, side by side. The tide holds them both gently, the way night now holds the little town, and the sailor, and the sleeping girl in his arms, and everyone else who has, tonight, let the day drift quietly out to sea. Somewhere in that quiet stillness, a rope creaks softly and settles. A lantern gutters low, then holds its small, steady flame. And the whole harbor breathes out slowly, the way anything does when it has finally stopped asking questions it was never quite going to answer tonight, and has simply decided, instead, to rest. Ably, wonderfully, it remains itself. And sometimes, quietly, in some back corner of a life, the old pieces gather themselves up to, and become something new, and just as true, in their own separate way. The old plank is lifted gently from its place, carried off to become something else entirely, firewood, or driftwood, or a second small boat with a story all its own, while a new, softer piece settles quietly into its spot instead, ready for tomorrow. The harbor stays still, the two ships rest against the dock, side by side. The tide holds them both gently, the way night now holds the little town, and the sailor, and the sleeping girl in his arms, and everyone else who has, tonight, let the day drift quietly out to sea. Somewhere in that quiet stillness, a rope creaks softly and settles. A lantern gutters low, then holds its small, steady flame. And the whole harbor breathes out slowly, the way anything does when it has finally stopped asking questions it was never quite going to answer tonight, and has simply decided, instead, to rest. Me back corner of a life, the old pieces gather themselves up to, and become something new, and just as true, in their own separate way. The old plank is lifted gently from its place, carried off to become something else entirely, firewood, or driftwood, or a second small boat with a story all its own, while a new, softer piece settles quietly into its spot instead, ready for tomorrow. The harbor stays still, the two ships rest against the dock, side by side. The tide holds them both gently, the way night now holds the little town. And the sailor, and the sleeping girl in his arms, and everyone else who has, tonight, let the day drift quietly out to sea. Somewhere in that quiet stillness, a rope creaks softly and settles. A lantern gutters low, then holds its small, steady flame. And the whole harbor breathes out slowly, the way anything does when it has finally stopped asking questions it was never quite going to answer tonight, and has simply decided, instead, to rest.